From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I want to thank you all so much for attending the book fair here and for joining us in a conversation with Alberto Ruy Sánchez. We'll be chatting about his Poetics of Wonder, Passage to Mogador. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes,
Mogador. Mogador.
Mogador.
Okay, he says it better. And The Secret Gardens of Mogador, both of which have been translated by a professor from the University of Louisville, Rhonda Dahl Buchanan. And for those of you who as yet are unfamiliar with his writing and with his life story, I should tell you a bit about him, just a brief bio. Born in Mexico City, he attended the University of Paris. His first novel, Los Nombres del Aire, The Names of the Air, the very first novel, was awarded the very prestigious Mexican Literary Award, the Premio Javier Villarrutia. More books followed, many books. How many books?
26.
Jeez. When do you sleep?
Well, one of my most recent books is called In Praise of Insomnia.
That's the wonderfully titled things. Then now you know the secret. In addition to his work as a writer, I want to point out something that for those of you who have spent time in Mexico or haven't had the pleasure of doing so yet, Alberto and Margarita de Orellana is the historian, a noted historian, and wife and husband.
And dance as well.
And dances as well. You learned to dance in order to stay married, you were telling me.
Yes.
Yes.
To save my marriage. Because he's from Cuban origin, he understands.
Well. If not, it wouldn't work. And I want to tell you about the magazine, the publication that they co-edit, which is called Artes de México. It is a truly fantastic publication. It is a publication that covers the thousands of years of art produced in Mexico. It is a publication that thinks of art very broadly, ranging from, say, mass of the Mayan culture, Olmec statues, to the mass of the luchadores, the wrestlers. It is an exceptional publication. If you ever come across it, I urge you to pick it up. I very much want this conversation, as you can tell already, I hope, to be a conversation, una plática. Among all of us, not just those of us here on stage. And I want to urge you, don't be shy. I'm not. Please interrupt. Feel free to interrupt in either English or Spanish, however the spirit may move you. No need to wait for the end. Please. You know, I was telling Alberto that I have two daughters. One who just turned 13, another who is about to turn 8. And somewhere in the last year, I gave up on trying to keep dinner table conversations on track. And I realized, A, it was pointless. It was a losing battle, and there was no point in getting angry. And 2, it's too much fun now that they are older to not just follow the streams of conversation, the digressions wherever they go. So I hope we'll do that. With all that said, let's welcome Alberto.
Thank you so much.
So we were just
Luis.
Discussing the pronunciation of Mogador. Tell us, what is Mogador?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for preparing this interview and everything. Sure. Thank all the audience for being here. I know that everyone has 7 chairs, so that it can. We prepared that for you so that you can climb and make a nap. It would become too boring. And of course, I want to thank the Library of Congress for inviting me, and especially the Mexican Cultural Institute. Thanks to them, I'm here. I'm really very proud of being invited by them. And well, Mogador is, you know, the fascinating thing about this city is that it existed before Morocco existed. Mm-hmm. It was a base of the Phoenicians. So it is one of the places where writing was invented.
So let's situate people. We are where?
It's the north of Africa on the Atlantic side.
Okay.
And it's a place where the richness was the purple color produced by an animal named anthrax that you don't kill, but you milk it. It's a little animal. And in Mexico, we have more or less the same that is used in the textiles to have this velvet purple color. So there is like many links between Mexico and Mogador that begin since the really the beginning of Mogador. There is first the color, and there's many stories. So,
do you travel to Morocco?
Oh yes.
How did the connection start?
Well, you know.
How did the obsession start?
Well, you know, the story is very long, but it began with me getting in love with a woman.
Isn't that how most stories start?
And so this woman went to France, and so I went after her. And we were there as very poor students, and the first winter, that is something terrible that happens, you know, there could be wars and there could be, but winter is something that gets into the spirit and the body of people, and they forget how to smile. So we needed some sun for many months. You don't have not a little bit of sun. So we decided to travel to the cheapest place to go. And we discovered something invented by the French technology of tourism. And it's called to travel in 4th class. And they invented that for the equivalent of the wetbacks, the Moroccan wetbacks that go work in Morocco, and they spend some of their savings in a better travel, but it's still the basement of the ships. So we travel in the basement of a ship from the south of France to Tangier. And there, many things happened. One of them was that we discovered that we had so many things in common with Morocco, that getting into the market in Tangier was like getting into our crafts market in Mexico.
Right.
That many of the ways of talking with the body language, was similar. Many things.
So let me recap. So it sounds like you traveled in the equivalent of steerage, along with Moroccan immigrants. And you were surprised to find yourself with these connections back home. You mentioned the experience of being at the crafts market. You talk a lot in your book about music and the sounds. Could you tell me about that connection?
Well, you know that there is a link between the cante hondo that comes from India, travels through Europe and gets to Spain, to the south of Spain, and the south of Spain is linked to Mexico in a way that is unavoidable. So when you go to Morocco, you can hear much of the music, the ancient music of the south, of the Arabic south of Spain, that in Spain the groups played as classical music. But the same, exactly the same music, the same score, is played by Moroccan musicians as popular music. And you know, in the popular music in Morocco, when they like something, they interrupt it. They applaud, or they say "waha," or you know, but when my first book was translated into Arabic, they made a party and they invited a Spanish orchestra and a Moroccan orchestra, and they play different things, and then they play the same score in their ways, and at the end they play together, and it was wonderful. It was really beautiful. And so all my work has been about making links between the south of Spain, what we have of the south of Spain and Mexico, and even through the language. But the music of the language, the taste of the language, the taste of words, the music of words, is very much linked to the Arabic world. You know that the best historian of the Spanish is Antonio Alatorre. He wrote a book called 1001 Años, 1001 Year of years of the Spanish language, and he made he made an account of 4,000 words that we have in Spanish that are almost the same as in Arabic.
Including aceite?
Aceite, for example, is Arabic. Aceite is Spanish.
Aceite is oil for those.
And so when we are talking Spanish, we are using Arabic words. And so is the music. For example, when in France, to make the sound of a jota, they use the K, KH, but we don't need that. We have the jota. And we have many words. For example, in Spain, they swim in piscinas.
Right.
We swim in albercas, which is the Arabic word. We have on the buildings, this is the decoration that is called, we called ajaraca, which means laces. And in Spain, they lost that word, and they only use the word esgrafiado, which is from Latin origin, and doesn't mean the same at all. So we have like a richness from the Arabic Moorish world that was lost in Spain, and we have it in Mexico.
So let's try and capture a little bit of that passage of your encounters and sense of Morocco in that passage we discussed. Alberto will read it first in Spanish, and then I'll read the translation in English.
Okay.
And I don't know if you speak Spanish. We'll find out.
Okay. They were teaching me how to say, I am Alberto. See? Dicen que, lógicamente, toda la música de Mogador es extensión de la piel de sus habitantes, pasados y presentes, de su manera de estar en el mundo, de sus armonías y contrapuntos, de sus explosiones percusivas y fugas, de su añoranza del sol cuando se oculta y, simultáneamente, de su júbilo al aparecer la luna. La piel tiene en Mogador un nombre antiguo que es sinónimo de tambor, y dicen que hace varios siglos, antes de sepultar a un muerto, hacían un tambor con su piel, que por eso las casas muy antiguas están llenas de venerados tamborcitos colgando de los muros. La gente los respeta con afecto y los descuelga para tocarlos como una manera de recordar a sus familiares fallecidos. Con mucha frecuencia los colocan justo donde los vientos alisios entran con fuerza a las ciudades del mar y los sacuden produciendo notas hondas, muy tenues y acompasadas. Por eso, al primer viento alisio del atardecer, cuando ha sido retocado por los instrumentos de los muertos, lo llaman viento requiem.
They say that music in Mogador is a natural extension of the skin of its inhabitants, past and present, of their echoes in this world, of their harmonious and discordant notes, of their percussive outbursts and fugues, of their longing for the sun when it goes into hiding, and also of their joy when the moon rises. In Mogador, skin has an ancient name that means drum. It is said that many centuries ago, before a corpse was buried, they would make a drum with its skin. This would explain why the very ancient houses are filled with beloved little drums hanging on their walls. People respect and cherish them and take them down to touch them as a way of remembering their deceased loved ones. They often place them exactly where the trade winds enter the city from the sea with a mighty force that shakes the drums, producing very faint and rhythmic low-pitched notes. For this reason, the first Elysian wind of the evening, which revives the drums of the departed, is called Requiem Wind.
I'm astonished that you choose that paragraph exactly, and that subject, because you know it's one of the the whole book is about how we would call an affirmation of life, the whole book is about the importance of eroticism. But eroticism is always linked to death. And when the book has been translated to several languages, on each language, of course, the erotic part has a role, but also the rituals of death, the way you deal with death. So it's like the cultural element that is in the book, that many people think that I imagine things. Mm-hmm. Many people think that there's something like imagination, pure imagination. But in fact, everything that I'm using is more or less ethnologically based, not only in Arabic or in my culture, but in different cultures. And it goes from the music to the mathematics implied in the structure of the book. But what the element that is the more international, the one that communicates the more, mm-hmm. is the music of the words and the subject of the music in all the books, and the dancing, and it's amazing because that it happens here with mm-hmm. you, and that we just met, and the Cuban connection. Okay, I would understand, but the same happened in Vietnam, for example, when the book was translated into Vietnamese. One way of communicating what happens with the book is through music. And when I went to Indonesia, the same happened. So it's like if it was a project. It's amazing. But of course, when you go to Ubud or in Bali, also the music is so important. And for example, there was a Mexican, Covarrubias, mm-hmm. who made the first important book on the Bali culture, and his main interest was music also. Yeah. So there is a link between cultures like Mexico and cultures from other places in the world, and we go through music.
Let me interject and see if there are any questions. Feel free just to raise your hand and speak aloud. No? Give it one more round. We'll keep going then. Okay. Or did I cut someone off? No? All right. I'm a journalist because if I didn't have deadlines, I wouldn't do anything. And because deadlines remind me of my mortality.
See, which is rhythm too.
Sure, sure. And you speak in The Secret Gardens. There's a garden of voices. Maybe let's speak in general about The Secret Gardens of Mogador, and the interaction between the narrator and the protagonist, a woman whose name is Hasiba.
Hasiba.
And you describe her name saying, resembling a light touch, a laceration at the beginning of the word that becomes labial, almost suggesting a kiss in its final two letters. How do you feel about that translation, by the way? Hmm? How do you feel about the translation in general?
Well, you know, I do believe that translations are like a musician performing and score. So I wrote and scored, and in Spanish has some music, some meaning, and the translation is the performance of one musician, and other will do it differently. I had several translations in different languages, and you can see that for example, my French translator is a virtuoso. He is really a genius. And in different languages happens differently. In English I had 3 different translations, and none of them is as the French one. Okay. But it's also the language, the person. But you know, sometimes when a friend says, "God with this translator and go to the other," or right. I do believe in the personal link with the translator. So I prefer that this person has a link with the work and cares about it. And if someday will be another way of translating it, that will happen or not. Okay. You know? But I believe very much, you know, in the magic of the power of each one of my books to develop in the people a kind of a friendship, not with me, but with the image they have of me,
sure.
but mainly with the books.
The books, communion of
yes,
sorts.
there is something that happens with those books that I cannot control,
right.
and the translation is part of it. The translation or illustrating. I didn't tell you that it's 5 books. This, which is a compendium of.
Correct.
The 2 you have, another 3. It's illustrated by a calligrapher that is he's like the Picasso of calligraphy in the world. Right. He's Hassan Massoudi. And he was very kind. He gave me the opportunity to use some of his calligraphies, and he made others. Even he made my name and everything. But when I published that, there was some woman who wanted to have those calligraphies as tattoos because they wanted to continue inhabiting the books. So I began to receive through internet a lot of photographs of, sometimes in places you cannot show, of tattoos of Mogador. So there is like a legion of women who became Mogadorian. And you know, an author cannot planify that. But the nicest thing, and that happened with the Poetics of Wonder, is that this final book, which is the introduction of the book, is made of 81 paragraphs. It's a mathematical formula that explains the whole book. And so I couldn't ask my friend 81 illustrations. It was really too much. So I went to a method to learn how to make calligraphies, and I copied like A, B, C, D, E. So the first edition was like that. But then there was a woman who translated the book into Italian. And she was not only happy making a tattoo of one of the illustrations. She went to Mogador. She became the pupil of a calligrapher, a master calligrapher. And you know, it's not only learning a craft, it's like a spiritual initiation. And she became a calligrapher herself. And her initiation, like her graduation work, was to illustrate the part of the book that was illustrated by Hassan Massoudi. And here, in the English edition, in this one, is the first time it's published. So, in all my books...
So these are hers?
Yes. In all my books, when the first one was published, I began to receive letters, and the readers were involved. So, the last example is really that one.
So let's just repeat to make sure we all caught this. There are tattoos of calligraphies from the book that people are sporting in interesting places, which is, for those of you who have not yet read any of the work, perfectly appropriate that they should be in very private places. Because I mentioned the description of Hasiba, and there's an awful lot of lovemaking in these books. I mean, again, maybe that's tied to the insomniac nature thing you were referring to earlier, but there's an awful lot of, I've never seen so many descriptions of female anatomy in one book. So politely written, I might add.
Well, I try to.
You connect that vision. We were starting to talk about voices and gardens. And there is, again, this connection between Hasiba and sort of a garden that is fertilizing on steroids. And all these descriptions of gardens, one of which is a garden of voices.
Oh, okay, we're good. So
of the crickets I'm referring
to. Let me tell you about the whole cycle.
Please.
The first volume is a research on woman's desire. It's called The Names of the Air. Why the names of the air? Because when you are in love, even the air that comes through the window has the name of the person you love. And that book is about a woman who is in love with another woman. And there is many people who misunderstand the love of each other, so it's like a chain of misunderstandings. But it's an exploration of woman's desire. The second one is about men's desire. And the third one is called in Leaps of Water. And the third one is about, exploring the possibility of a couple making a paradise, any kind of couple. So there is a woman, a character, well, also, that was written when we already had children. And in our marriage, we had 2 children, but we had them after more than 10 years of being together. So in pregnancy, our eroticism flourished. And that doesn't happen to all the people. So I wanted to know why, and I made a research, and I interviewed a lot of pregnant women about her erotic life while they were pregnant.
What did their husbands say about this?
Well, I avoid the husbands. In that chapter, I avoid the husbands, but I asked the woman about the husband. And you know, there's basically 3 categories. There is the woman who abandons eroticism. Well, first, most of the men are afraid and escape. So some of the women terrorized. Yeah. Men, we are very, very coward.
Yes.
Linking to our security to the pregnancy of women. And many women abandon eroticism and they don't think about it. But there is a second category that is very, very numerous of women who have an intensity of their erotic life. And you know, even the water has a different taste for a pregnant woman. And those women many times have their first relation out of marriage in that time. And that's amazing. That's something that surprised me. But that happens, and I documented.
I could see now why you didn't speak to the husband.
So I had a lot of stories that I couldn't tell. And then there was a third category.
I can't wait to hear this.
Of women, very few of them, who decided to educate the husband. Many times were women who really believe in the power of educating the husband. So the main Hasiba is one of those women. And her method is, well, she's the daughter of a gardener, the only gardener in Mogador. And she thinks of garden as a metaphor of paradise. And to challenge her husband and lover, who is beginning not to hear the desires in her body, she makes of him a new male Shahrazad.
And he has an obligation to come forth each day.
Challenge to tell a story of desire, describe a secret garden of Mogador every night if he wants to make love.
And he gets pretty creative, I have to say.
So he's threatened by her, saying, we will only make love if you come every night with a garden. And he said, but there is no more gardens than the one your father made. He said, well, a garden is a place, a space, something that the force of desire transforms. Could be a collection, could be a relation, but mainly it could be a garden. And she says, but you cannot invent the desires you are telling me about. You really need to bring me desires that exist. And you need to invent the way of telling them. So when I wrote that, I said, wow, I need to do that. The challenge is against me now. I cannot invent anything. So she thinks that if he learns how to read the desires in the world, he will become a better lover, especially if he learns and invents how to tell them. And I needed to fulfill the same requirement. So I spent like 5 years, almost 6 years, going everywhere in the world, asking for extravagancies of the people, inquiring about woman's desire, but also about places that the desire transforms, so that the couple could live.
So give me some examples of the places.
Yes, you know, for example, I was invited to the University of Kentucky, and there was a museum that had a collection of Henry Moore, this British artist who inspired all his sculpture on Mexican, ancient Mayan. So I said, maybe this garden, and it was put on a garden, so maybe this garden will be something that if the protagonist tells Hasiba, she will like to make love. And I went, and there was nothing. There was only a curator putting statues like in order. So there was no passion. There was not any extravagant. There was really no desire, not a deep desire there. But I got inside the museum, and what did I find? I found that some American millionaires were in their life collecting the little cages that Chinese emperors use to collect crickets, grasshoppers. And every one of these little cages, that is like bird cages, but little small, made of wood, of many materials, every one of them is a work of art. And I was astonished by the size and the beauty of, there was more than 100. And I said, well, you know, here there is the will of, there is a desire. And I imagine if these collectors donated this to the museum, they surely donated the books that they collected linked to these cages. So I went to the library and I asked to see the collection, and it was like, you know, like 20 books on the subject. And many of the things that you can think that I imagine when I tell the story, they are true, absolutely true. And for example, there is, not in China, but in Japan, you know, Japan is, take a lot of the Chinese culture, transforms and make it something different. But in Japan, there is a kimono with 12 levels, and each one of the level, they put a cricket that is sensitive to the heat. So when the lover gets the hand inside the kimono, if it's close to where the cricket is, the cricket sings. Like when in Spanish we say caliente, caliente, caliente.
You know, you just ruined the child's game for me. Or made it better, maybe. But
so every one of the chapters in the book tells a real desire that I found somewhere in the world.
Okay,
but I didn't invent, but I invented the way of telling them. So for this Garden of Voices, I imagine an homage to Borges. And the gardener is a blind man who takes care of the grasshoppers and puts plants, but only to be eaten by the crickets. And the whole story is told in that register, in that imagined fantasy register based on literal reality, historical reality.
Now, you had to go to Kentucky to learn about, and I thought I had turned off my phone, and I was going to tell people to turn off their phones. Apologies.
I can answer.
No. You know, it's probably my wife, so that's not a good idea.
She doesn't know where you are.
She does. But the interesting thing about the Kentucky angle that I have to mention for people, a very suave transition there if you missed it, is that you are something called a Kentucky colonel. Is this true?
Yes, isn't it? Amazing.
I mean, I only know one Kentucky colonel, and you don't look like him. I mean, how did this happen? Please don't.
The fried Kentucky?
Exactly.
Well, you know, Kentucky is a very special state.
Agreed.
And they have these beautiful horses that look like very fragile, and they are amazingly beautifully
I can't wait to see where this is going.
And there is universities.
Yeah.
To give honors, the universities make the most weird things. Well, you know, they had as a governor a wrestler.
That's right. Yeah.
A fighter of lucha libre, you know? So you can expect anything. So when the university wants to make a honor, instead of giving you a PhD, an honorary PhD, they make you Kentucky Colonel.
I'd take Kentucky Colonel over an honorary degree any day. I think that's a fun option.
You know, I received, the first time I went, I was a honorary citizen of Louisville. And that was, well, you say, this is the biggest. They gave me like the key of the city and everything. But they continue inviting me. So the next time, they made me Kentucky Colonel. And so I say, well, what comes next? I will, the secret formula.
Make you a bourbon master. That is the next
time, I have been there 4 times. And the next time, I was appointed as honorary captain of the Belle of Louisville, which is the oldest steamboat going in the affluents of the Mississippi. So that I loved. And I wanted to drive it, and they allowed me to drive it like for a kilometer or something like that.
Wonderful.
And the next time, they say, well, what comes next? The next time, they decided that the 24th of October of that year was dedicated to me. It was Alberto Ruy Sánchez Day in Kentucky. So, you know, it's paradise.
You know, it's always wonderful and fascinating to learn some of the backstory to some of the most beautiful passages of the book. I mean, that section to me about the Garden of the Voices and the crickets and the person who keeps it is beautiful insofar as it references both the beginning and the end of the book and the notion of voices becoming shadows and that sort of connection. But I would not have tied it to Kentucky Colonels or steamboat captains.
And I receive every year an invitation to go to the Derby, because all Kentucky Colonels have breakfast with the governor at the Derby.
Have you taken advantage of that?
Oh no, it's quite far.
Okay.
My horse didn't run so far.
So in your case, Mogador is both a real place and an imaginary place, right? In the same way that, say, Yoknapatawpha County or Macondo are real and imaginary at the same time. Is that liberating, or is it more terrifying, really, to bear that responsibility?
You know, I come from a generation who grew up reading writers who wrote about their neighborhood in Mexico City. José Agustín, Gustavo Sainz. And so even my generation, all my friends, Juan Villoro, the others, wrote about their neighborhoods. And they had the idea that it was a realistic way of telling what they were living. And I always found that even if we were in the same street describing the same things, it was imaginary. It was their neighborhood and it was my neighborhood. And that you are always creating something. So I think that the real essence of a place is somewhere else. It's not in the way of telling things in a realistic way, but in capturing the essence of people, of, you know, what people dreams about tells you much more about the neighborhood than describing the size of the sidewalk. Sometimes the sidewalk is meaningful, but not always. My
brother-in-law, Pablo Vargas Lugo, is a Mexican artist, and one of his works of art concerns a Mexican sidewalk, just for the record. Are there questions?
Very good, but very good artist, by the way.
Yes, thank you. Are there questions that anyone would like to interject with? Okay, we'll continue then. And feel free again to interrupt. Sure. Oh, wait, there we go. Oh, wait, we've got a microphone headed your way.
I just wanted to ask whether you also looked at some literature written, or some Arabic literature, whether you're inspired by poetry in Arabic, for example, from the time of the medieval caliphate, and just whether that was also an inspiration for you, because a lot of that poetry also deals with gardens, with desire, and so I guess some of the same topics that are present in your work. So I was wondering whether literature was also an inspiration for you.
The nice thing about the literature of the world is that you learn that there are so many ways of telling things. So, for example, in the Arabic tradition, there is one genre that is called adab, and it's a mixture of genres. So that was something that really inspires me, but not at the beginning. At the beginning, for me, you know, I come from a family, and one of my cousins is here, very close to you, Elsa, that it's a family emigrated from the north of Mexico, from Sonora, from the desert. And as a migrated family, we have a lot of gatherings where the oldest first and then everyone tells the stories. So my grandmother was a wonderful storyteller. So storytelling, when I wrote for the first time something, was because I wanted to write something to read to my family, to tell to my family. Not only, you know, the conversation in the dinner, really, for example, the ritual, do you remember, Elsa? The ritual of giving gifts in Christmas was a performance. One of the uncles came and he invented the stories when he saw who was giving a gift to whom, and he invented the story about the people who was to receive the gift, and this story was very imaginative, and everybody wanted to guess, and then to guess what it was inside. So when I went to Morocco, one of the first things that impressed me was a wonderful, amazing tradition of telling stories in the public spaces. And you know, there is a square in Marrakech called the square Jma'-el-Zna, which means the square of the dead. And there is storytellers. And the storytellers are amazingly alive, and they have rituals. And there is a lot of anthropologists who study them. They have, for example, something that I try to have on these books. And when I was talking about the tattoos and the readers and the people who write me, is what they call it halka. Halka means the audience that always go surrounding one storyteller, and this storyteller includes what the audience tells them, and it becomes part of the story. And as what they tell becomes part of the story, it's also the tradition. So a lot of classics and a lot of the literature that you can learn here in the university. But you know, one of the nicest things I learned on this trip happened on the ship. On the ship, we went 36 hours in the basement of that ship, and there was more than a nightmare. There was a storm, and really a storm that put everyone out of their body. Everybody was very, 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 very sick. And you know, there was cries, there was the smell, it was so strong and so hard that you felt that the storm didn't begin outside, that came to you, but that the storm began in your body, and the trembling was really projecting towards the sky. That it was in your stomach that the storm was beginning. It was really something that you began it and then the ship made like that. And you couldn't sleep, of course. You vanished. So we vanished. And we woke up 36 hours later, and there was a light who came to the basement, and there was the sound that said, well, you know, first class will go down first, and we heard people running, and then second class and third class, and they were already down. And fourth class, that was us, and nobody moved. So my wife and I, we were in the floor like that, so we tried to see if there was no one there. And all the people was in the back of the room, and there was a man telling a story. It was a storyteller. And this storyteller was a storyteller from the Jmalvna Square. And I noticed that he was telling what we lived the life before. He was telling about us. He was telling about a woman who wrapped a baby with his shawl, and the baby was like a planet around it. There was the story of very religious people. What do you do when you are very religious and you are in a ship that seems to break down? You pray. So they put a carpet and they prayed. But there was another group who believed that the Mecca was not in that direction, but they pray in the other direction. So like in 15 minutes, instead of praying, they were fighting each other. And then he was talking about Mexicans who were very sick and very afraid of vomiting, and you know the Arabs were very open. And I noticed that he was using the structure of a classic of the literature called Das Narrenschiff, The Ship of Fools, by Sebastian Brandt. It's a 17th century, 1620 book. And I said that, what are classics for? What is the use of classics? It's not to have a good degree in school. It's not to know something to accumulate it. Classics gives you an order where there is chaos. We were living a chaos, the chaos of storm, and so there was this man using a classic to give an order and understand something, having a reading of what we lived. In that way, I use everything that I was having access to, and I spent a lot of time, and I read a lot of, but you know, influences never jump directly from one book to the other. You eat them and you sweat them. And influences are in your books when they are sweat. For example, I have a huge influence of Samuel Beckett, because he's a geometrical writer. But reading my book, you cannot tell that is, but it's maybe my main influence. I have another influence of Les Amalima that you know very well. It's a Baroque, but it's for another reason. And so sometimes you can see and you can see, so the influence I have, to go to the origin of your word, wrapping it up as I was ordered to do, I used classics, but I used them in that way, in a very alive way of using classics.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. I'm sure Alberto will hang around for a few minutes, take a few additional questions on the side, but we're being ordered off the stage. So thank you very much to all of you, and thank you to Alberto.
No, thanks to you, Luis. Really, you're wonderful.
That's it, eh?
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.